disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Val Macer, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the February 22nd issue of the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Sean McCreish has written an article titled "Trump Plans to Turn a People's Park into a Luxury Destination." This is a story about mud and power in Washington. It begins at the turn of the 20th century, when this was a smaller, swampier place. Back then, there were great mud flats clogging up the Potomac River just south of where the Washington Monument stood. Ships could not pass over the shallows. Sewage collected here. A plan was made to build them up into something pretty. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers got to work, dredging the river, piling the mud atop the marsh. A crescent-shaped island that appeared became an important piece of Washington's modern geography. The Jefferson Memorial was built on the island's western lip, which backs up to the tidal basin and the National Mall. The rest of the man-made island was turned into a public park called East Potomac. It's a neat place. There are hundreds of cherry blossom trees, a road for cycling that wraps around the perimeter of the island, and a primo park area at its eastern tip. Most of the park is taken up by an affordable golf course that has been there in some form since the beginning. The course, East Potomac Golf Links, is a bit shabby, but the prices are unbeatable. $42 for 18 holes. Not much had changed about East Potomac over the decades until one day last October when some dump trucks showed up. The trucks were sent by the White House. They were carrying mud. The trucks drove onto the golf course and somewhere between the 4th and 9th hole began dumping mounds and mounds of the stuff. Tiny bits of rebar, wiring, and specks of white plaster poked up from the piles. Word quickly spread among the golfers about the mystery mud. Turns out it was the remains of the East Wing, which President Trump had demolished days earlier. His destruction of one piece of Washington history heralded his destruction of another. Mr. Trump has big plans for that little island. He wants to make it into a luxury golf destination. How exactly will he do this, you ask? Even he doesn't seem to know, but one thing is certain. It's going to take a lot of dirt to get it done. And there is a lot of dirt in back of the White House, where the big dig for the president's ballroom grinds on. And so, week after week, the trucks show up and the mound in the middle of the golf course grows. A National Park Service memo estimated there would be 30,000 cubic yards of soil in all. That would be about 2,000 truckloads. We're going to make it a beautiful, world-class U.S. Open caliber course, Mr. Trump said when asked about it this month. Ideally, we're going to have major tournaments there and everything else. It's going to bring a lot of business into Washington. Not long after the dumping began, the Trump administration took full control of the course in East Potomac Park, terminating a lease that the National Park Service had with a nonprofit called National Links Trust, which managed that course as well as 2 others in the city. The idea that the billionaire president, who operates more than a dozen of his own gold-plated golf clubs, he already has one on the Potomac, just a 45-minute drive upstream, would turn the proudly proletarian East Potomac course into a baby Bedminster has been profoundly depressing to many locals who love to play in the park. People tend to view golf as a rich man's game, and maybe it is, but not in this park. A senior or veteran can play 9 holes for $16, and a kid can play for less. These little municipal courses, golfers call them munis, are places where anyone can meet up on a Saturday, play for a few bucks, have a hot dog, and tell some jokes. No membership required. If Mr. Trump makes a championship course out of it, it's likely to cost way more. The cheapest round on a recent day at the Trump National Doral in Miami was $215. A hot dog was $24. Administration officials say it's too soon to say how the government will manage such a course while keeping it affordable, or what will become of it after Mr. Trump leaves office in 3 years. Several of the top golf course architects in the country expressed puzzlement as to how Mr. Trump would go about constructing a world-class course that could host major tournaments on this peculiar bit of land. I think it's a crazy idea, said Mark Mungime, who is president of the American Society of Golf Course Architects. It's even crazier, some of the other architects mused, when you consider that Mr. Trump does actually know a lot about what goes into making an elite golf course. What would compel him to push for one here? President Trump built some of the greatest golf courses in the world, and he's now extending his unmatched design skill and excellent eye for detail to D.C.'s public golf courses, said Taylor Rogers, a White House spokeswoman. The president and his extraordinary team will redevelop these decrepit golf courses in our nature's capital to restore glamour and prestige. But it's a public park. It wasn't designed to be glamorous or prestigious. The president seems to be in some sort of pharaonic legacy building mode, treating the Capitol as his great sandbox. He has initiated so many construction projects, it's hard to imagine how all of them will be completed or even funded by the time he leaves office. There's the ballroom, the triumphal arch across the river, a proposed statue garden, plans to rip up Lafayette Park, whatever it is that it's about to happen to the JFK Center for the Performing Arts. And now, a bit downriver from that, there is this. A pattern emerges. His takeovers come suddenly and without warning. Vaguely defined promises of something gilded and grand follow. Blueprints, to the extent that they exist, are shrouded in opacity. There is no input accepted from the public or lawmakers. The people panic because, as Mr. Trump has demonstrated, he is willing to bulldoze things that have been around for a long time and that mean a lot to a lot of people, even if he promised he wouldn't. This is how he operates. This is how he has always operated. Can he really do that? The preeminent question on all things East Potomac is a man named Mike McCartan. Mr. McCartan, 44, grew up learning to play golf in the park with his father, wrote about the park for his master's thesis on affordable golf, and eventually came to be in charge of the park's course in 2020, when National Links Trust, the nonprofit he helped start, was awarded a 50-year lease from the government at the end of the first Trump term. The park was, and is, in need of some tender loving care. It seems to be sinking back into the river at certain points. After years of flooding, the ground is seriously squishy in places. Sections of the walking trail at the water's edge are closed off. The seawall needs rebuilding, and the course could use some work too. That's what Mr. McCartan and National Links Trust were brought in to do. The group managed 2 other golf courses in the city. One is a historically black golf course, and the other is in Rock Creek Park. Renovations in East Potomac Park, in particular, were slow going for all sorts of bureaucratic reasons. Shortly after Mr. Trump returned to office, an official from the Interior Department reached out to National Links Trust. The Trump administration saw potential in the waterfront park. Maybe they could all work together. But as the spring turned to summer, the administration grew impatient and started to take a stronger hand. Communication broke down. In October, the truckloads of dirt started to arrive. By December, the president was telling the Wall Street Journal he wanted National Links Trust out. I think what we're looking to do is just build something different, he said. The group's lease would be terminated a few days later. The Trump administration contends that National Links Trust was slow and ineffective, but in an interview, Mr. McCartan protested that his group could only move as fast as we were allowed to through the compliance processes. He expressed a lingering bewilderment at how it all seemed to fall apart so quickly. There's an opportunity to figure out how to work together and accomplish something great, Mr. McCartan said. I don't know why that hasn't been a conversation that we've been able to have. It's a classic Trumpian takeover. Before he knew it, Mr. McCartan was getting steamrolled. A group of Democratic senators from Maryland and Virginia put out a joint statement decrying Mr. Trump's extreme overreach and disregard for ongoing investment projects, and a pair of golfers filed a suit this month. But as with the Kennedy Center and the East Wing, by the time people are asking, can he really do that? It's usually too late. An administration official helping to oversee the project in East Potomac Park said it was too soon to know how exactly the president's course would be built. The official could not share cost projections or a timeline. No architect has been announced. The top three architects who have worked on U.S. Open courses explained what would probably need to happen on the island in order for the course to become U.S. Open caliber, as the president said he wanted. As it stands, the 210-acre course takes up much of the park, but not all of it. The architects all agreed that the course would need to get bigger. The road that the public uses to bike and run around the island would probably be demolished so that the course could extend to the water's edge. The picnic area would have to go too, and so would the forest of cherry trees. This last point has particularly upset people, since some of those trees are the original cherry blossoms that were sent to Washington in 1910, a gift from the mayor of Tokyo. Even still, it's difficult to see how the park could then fit the crowds, parking lots, and hospitality venues that go into hosting the kind of tournament Mr. Trump has talked about having. It's a great aspiration, but technically I think the land is not big enough, said Robert Trent Jones Jr., a former president of the American Society of Golf Course Architects. His father was one of the most renowned architects in the history of the spot, and his brother, Rhys Jones, is a top architect as well. Rhys was a little less skeptical than his brother. He could do it, Rhys Jones says of Mr. Trump. It's just when you design a tournament golf course, you have to think of all the additional items you need to fit in it during the event. Told that his brother said this about East Potomac Park, Robert Jones replied, "Has he played it? I don't think so. I've actually played it." To which Rhys Jones replied, "He hasn't agreed with me since we were kids," although he did admit he hadn't played at the park. Mr. Mungine, the current president of the American Society of Golf Architects, said that the whole issue of it being an island and there's only one way in and out. Spelled disaster for a tournament scenario. Plus, he pointed out, the site does not provide topographic interest for golf. It's a man-made island. It's flat. Beyond any topographical considerations, Mr. Mungine bristled at the idea that the entirety of the park should be given over for championship golf. The park is now a public park, he said. The golf is very much affordable. Public access golf. He said he'd followed the work that the National Links Trust had been doing over these last 5 years. I admire what they've done to date, he said, and I think it's a shame that their lease was terminated. One unseasonably warm day in January, the park's driving range was filled with people swinging clubs. A man and his son finished up a round and stopped to chat. The man was Brian King, a 68-year-old mural painter from Arlington, Virginia. His son's name is Eamon. They'd heard about the president's plan to turn it into something flashy. They were worried they wouldn't be able to afford whatever it was about to become. It'll be a real loss for people of the city, Brian King said, a Callaway bag slung over his shoulder. There's plenty of very expensive country clubs in this area already, said Eamon. This has always been kind of like the people's course. Father and son stared in direction of the mud, piled high and surrounded by fencing a few hundred yards from where they stood. I'm not happy about it, Brian King said. More mud showed up the next week. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Shane Goldmacher and Katie Glueck have written an article called Trump Defiance on Tariffs Poses Headache for GOP. Clinging to unpopular levies despite ruling could hurt his party in the midterms. President Trump's defiant response to the Supreme Court decision striking a blow against his signature economic tool pushed the Republican Party further down an uncomfortable path of defending tariffs that are unpopular with the public. Lashing out at the majority of the justices who ruled against him as fools and lapdogs, Mr. Trump dismissed the most sweeping judicial rebuke of his second term on Friday as little more than a technicality, as he vowed to plow ahead with new, across-the-globe tariffs using a different law. We have very powerful alternatives, Mr. Trump declared, announcing a new 10% import tax for those who thought they had us. Yet the painful political reality for Republicans, even those allied with the president, is that his tariff regime has proved deeply unpopular. Some privately lamented that Mr. Trump had missed a chance to walk them back ahead of a midterm election expected to turn heavily on the economy, instead of recommitting to a policy that divides his party. It was a bad policy, Representative Don Bacon, a retiring Republican from Nebraska, who has clashed with Mr. Trump on the issue of tariffs and other matters, said in an interview. It's also bad politics. A majority of Americans and 58% of independent voters opposed Mr. Trump's tariffs, according to a New York Times Siena University poll released last month. At a moment when the top issue for voters is the cost of living, Republicans are waging an uphill battle defending tariffs on imports that economists have repeatedly said ultimately result in higher prices for consumers. A Fox News poll last month showed that tariffs ranked among Mr. Trump's worst performing issues. Mr. Trump loves tariffs anyway. He insists that the economists are wrong. Import taxes are so close to his heart that he has frequently called tariff his favorite word in the dictionary, and he has been talking up the importance of trade deficits for decades. As president, he has deployed tariffs as a foundation of both his economic and foreign policy agendas. This was an important case to me, Mr. Trump said Friday. Some Republicans had been hopeful in the immediate aftermath of the ruling that it might take some of the political pressure off them and ease rising prices. Mr. Trump dashed those hopes almost immediately. The impact that tariffs have had on Americans doesn't disappear simply because they may have ended, said Neil Newhouse, a Republican pollster. This action by the Supreme Court should not be thought as throwing the GOP a life preserver for November. The High Court's 6-3 ruling, coming only days before Mr. Trump's State of the Union address, also makes it likely that the president will take more time defending his tariffs in a speech expected to be his most watched ahead of the midterms. Some of the justices whom Mr. Trump attacked in caustic terms on Friday could be seated just feet away from him on Tuesday night. It is a very, very unpopular policy, and right when he's trying to flip the script on the economy, he is going to double down on a plank of the economy that people hate, said Rahm Emanuel, a former chief of staff to President Barack Obama, who is considering a run for president of his own as Democrat in 2028. Have at that, brother. For months, Democrats have blamed Mr. Trump's on-again, off-again tariffs for destabilizing the economy and worsening the affordability crisis, as Representative Hakeem Jeffries, the top Democrat in the House, put it. Now they can also say the tariffs broke the law. Governors Gavin Newsom of California and J.B. Pritzker of Illinois, two Democrats considering potential 2028 presidential candidates, both demanded refund checks for families in their states who had to pay more for imported goods in recent months after the court ruled Mr. Trump's tariffs were unconstitutional. Cough up, Mr. Newsom said in a statement. The 2026 elections were already shaping up as a referendum on Mr. Trump and his stewardship of the economy, a dynamic he knows well. Mr. Trump won in 2024 after relentlessly attacking Joseph R. Biden Jr., then the president, for his management of the economy and rising inflation. Strategists in both parties said the Supreme Court's rejection of a centerpiece of his economic agenda would only sharpen that focus, even if voters are unlikely to be swayed by any debates about separation of power. Any political impact won't come from the court's reasoning, said Chris Wilson, a Republican pollster. It will come from whether voters feel stronger or weaker economically. In Nevada, Aaron Ford, the Democratic Attorney General, said he planned to make tariffs a big part of his campaign for governor against Governor Joe Lombardo, the Republican incumbent, who last year mused that Nevadans maybe need to feel a little pain in the short term to get long-term benefits from tariffs. Affordability, Mr. Ford said in an interview, is the issue, capital T, capital H, capital E, for voters, and their pockets have been hit by nearly $1,000 in 2025 because of these tariffs. The tariff fight also thrusts to the fore an issue that divides the Republican Party, whose elected leaders have been ardently in favor of free trade until Mr. Trump's arrival. Congress's role in trade policy, as I have warned repeatedly, is not an inconvenience to avoid, Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, the former Republican leader, said in a scathing statement after the ruling. Former Vice President Mike Pence hailed the ruling, saying American families and American businesses pay American tariffs, not foreign countries. Others, such as Senator Bernie Moreno, a Republican of Ohio and Trump ally, pushed for Congress to codify Mr. Trump's powers to impose tariffs. This betrayal must be reversed, he said in a statement on the ruling. Only 9 days before, the House voted to rescind tariffs that Mr. Trump had imposed on Canada, with 6 Republicans, including Mr. Bacon, crossing party lines to join nearly all Democrats to back the resolution. Mr. Bacon suggested it would have been smarter politics for more Republicans in competitive seats to break with the party on this subject. But he also described a pressure campaign from the White House and party leadership, saying he received 25 phone calls and 55 texts urging him to change his position. Mr. Trump said on Friday that he had authority to impose tariffs himself, but one statute that he planned to invoke to put in place the 10% global tariff imposes a 50-day limit unless Congress votes to extend them. Jason Rowe, a Michigan-based Republican strategist who has worked on House races, said letting the court roll back tariffs would have been one of the few things that the Trump administration could have done to almost immediately address rising costs, especially in a state like his, which has deep economic ties to Canada. He added that making Republican lawmakers vote in favor of more tariffs in the coming months would be risky. If we're not seeing measurable reductions in how people feel about the cost of living between now and November, Mr. Rowe said, putting Republican members of Congress out to vote for higher tariffs is making them culpable for those higher costs politically. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Mark Mazzetti and Helene Cooper have written an article called Deadlier Risks If U.S. Attacks Iran a Second Time, a news analysis. President Trump is considering committing the U.S. to another military campaign against Iran, a decision that carries the risk of igniting a conflict that could prove to be longer, deadlier, and far more dangerous than last year's 12-day war. Last June, the United States joined a campaign against Iran that Israel had begun, and Mr. Trump gave the military a specific goal: to bomb Iranian nuclear facilities and set back Tehran's ability to one day make a nuclear weapon. Within days of the U.S. strikes, all sides agreed to a ceasefire. There were no American casualties. Now the Pentagon is in the midst of the largest military buildup in the Middle East in 2 decades, and Mr. Trump is considering a far more expansive operation, this time led by U.S. forces, without saying publicly what he hopes to achieve. Would a campaign once again be focused on Iran's nuclear sites? Would there be additional strikes to eviscerate Iran's ballistic missile arsenal, which Iran has insisted it would not give up through negotiation? Or could Mr. Trump's goal be something he has often said was dangerous folly? Using the military to remove a government of the Middle East from power? A war for regime change could lead to untold civilian deaths in Iran and a wider conflict across the region. The president told reporters on Friday that he was weighing a limited military strike to pressure Iran into a deal. I guess I can say I'm considering that, he said at the start of a meeting with governors at the White House. The ambiguity around Mr. Trump's aims could, according to some U.S. officials and Middle East experts, be particularly dangerous, as it may lead Iran's government to see an American-led offensive as a threat to its existence. As a result, Iran could escalate the conflict against the United States and Israel in ways it did not during the attacks last June, or after the military assassinated General Qasem Soleimani, the head of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, in 2020. Vali Nasser, an Iran expert at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, said there was a risk that Iran would calculate that its muted response to previous military operations only invited more threats from the United States, and that it must escalate the cost of war for the U.S. In a letter on Thursday to the United Nations Secretary General, the head of Iran's UN mission said that if Iran was attacked, then all bases, facilities, and assets of the hostile force in the region would constitute legitimate targets, and that the United States would bear full and direct responsibility for any unpredictable and uncontrolled consequences. That could put the 30,000 to 40,000 U.S. troops currently stationed in 13 military bases across the Middle East at particular risk. Pentagon officials have been scrambling to move more air defense batteries to the region to protect the bases. Last June, Iran launched a volley of missiles against American troops at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, but Iranian officials privately warned U.S. and Qatari officials in advance. This time it would be different, as a senior Pentagon official acknowledged last week. U.S. troops could be at much greater risk, he said, if the United States, not Israel, initiates this round of strikes. Israel, of course, could still take the brunt of any Iranian retaliation. During the conflict last June, Iran launched hundreds of long-range missiles at government, military, and civilian targets in Israel. Israeli military officials said they succeeded in intercepting more than 80% of the missiles, and yet the barrage still did extensive damage and killed several dozen Israeli citizens. The Iranian missile attacks forced Israel to begin conserving its supply of interceptors, and some Israeli officials in recent weeks have warned that a much larger conflict could strain the country's ability to defend cities in Israel. Iran faces its own risky calculations if it considers a full-scale retaliation against U.S. troops or Israeli cities, something that would become an enormous gamble for a regime whose paramount goal is survival, said Karim Sadeghipour, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. It could lead Mr. Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel to escalate further than originally planned, to make the ultimate goal of war to bring down Iran's government. The formidable array of American ships, jets, bombers, drones, surveillance aircraft, and air defense units headed to the Middle East is the most tangible evidence that the Pentagon sees the prospect of war lasting beyond 12 days. It looks like positioning for a much larger conflict, said Catherine Thompson of the Cato Institute, who was a senior policy official at the Defense Department during the first year of the first Trump administration. The Pentagon appears to be anticipating an Iranian response that could be a significant risk to American bases in the region, she said. But even with advanced planning, Ms. Thompson said, the Pentagon is always aware that it has a finite supply of missile interceptors to protect its bases or Israeli cities, and that a protracted conflict could force difficult decisions. The ability of the United States to sustain prolonged defense of its forces and basing in the region, while also supporting Israel's defense, is a major concern, she said. A second U.S. military official said that the U.S. Central Command was keeping 2 aircraft carriers deployed in the Middle East at a considerable distance from Iran to protect them from becoming a target. Officials also noted that it was difficult to hit an aircraft carrier traveling at speed with a ballistic missile. In addition, the carriers are escorted by destroyers, which have the ability to shoot down ballistic missiles. There are American troops at bases in Qatar, Bahrain, Iraq, Syria, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates. U.S. officials said that hundreds of troops have been moved from Al Udeid base in Qatar and a cluster of U.S. bases in Bahrain that house the Navy's Fifth Fleet for other missions and operations. At least publicly, Trump administration officials insist that they remain committed to seeing if there is a diplomatic end to the standoff, one that could see Iran agreeing to new restrictions on its nuclear program. Privately, however, they say it is difficult to see what Iran may offer in the near term that could dissuade Mr. Trump from committing to another military campaign. During his first 13 months in office, Mr. Trump has ordered 7 military attacks in other countries, and he has been emboldened by the successful outcome of the most recent operation, the Commando mission in Venezuela in early January, that captured President Nicolas Maduro and his wife and brought them to the United States. Mr. Trump's confidence is reflected in his blustery rhetoric aimed at Iran, pledging in one social media post in late January that the next attack will be far worse. Don't make that happen again. That day, Iran's mission to the UN responded with a warning of its own. If pushed, it said in a statement, Iran will defend itself and respond like never before. Kurt Streeter has written an article called A Somber Perspective from Skiers Who Got Out as a Doomed Group Arrived. Last Sunday morning, 2 parties moved through the mountains above Donner Summit in opposite directions, one heading out from a cluster of backcountry cabins called the Frog Lake Huts, the other hiking in. The groups never saw each other that day. Only one would return whole. The party heading out consisted of 4 friends who had just spent 3 days in the huts, perched high on the crest of the Sierra Nevada. Among them was Kurt Greinsheimer, a trail builder and backcountry veteran from Verde, Nevada. It was the most amazing conditions I can remember, Mr. Greinsheimer said. Bluebird skies, no wind, the mountains to themselves. The biggest storm of the season was bearing down, and the 4 friends wanted to be gone before it hit. The party heading in was much larger. Clients and guides from Blackbird Mountain Guides, which Mr. Greinsheimer described as a highly respected outfit. The same storm that ushered his party out did not, apparently, keep the Blackbird group home. 2 days later, on Tuesday, February 17th, the storm claimed at least 8 of those lives. The Blackbird party was on the north-facing slope near Perry's Point when an enormous slab of snow broke loose, sweeping all 15 members of the group downhill. 6 survived, 8 were confirmed dead, and 1 remains missing, the deadliest avalanche in the United States in more than 4 decades. The group had set out for the trailhead that morning despite high danger warning issued by the Sierra Avalanche Center before dawn. The center had specifically warned of a weak layer expected to reach the point of failure that day. Before noon, a guide shouted avalanche before the mountain gave way. The survivors have not spoken publicly. Until they do, fellow backcountry experts and broader public can only speculate at how the group arrived at its decisions. How did the skiers decide to embark on the trip despite the foreboding forecast? Were the guides aware of the avalanche warnings? And did the group discuss the risks together? Why did they leave the huts on Tuesday morning rather than hunkering down? And how did they choose their route down the mountain? The storm that hit the Sierra buried everything. 3 to 6 feet of snow had fallen since Sunday. Winds gusted over 60 miles per hour. Interstate 80 over Donner Summit was closed in both directions. The 6 survivors took shelter in a stand of trees with a tarp, texting rescuers through an iPhone satellite SOS system, while 46 emergency responders fought through whiteout conditions to reach them. It took hours. 2 of the 6 were hospitalized. From the smaller party, Mr. Gensheimer and his friend Tom Beckerine were 2 of the skiers who made it out. Mr. Gensheimer, 48, had spent 15 years in the backcountry. Mr. Beckerine, 52, a project manager for a landscape company by trade, operates at a different level. He has skied the backcountry for 3 decades, almost daily, and considers himself a regular at the Frog Lake huts. The 2 men who host a Mind the Track podcast about outdoor culture nearly had to cancel their trip. Weeks of drought had left the mountains covered in old snow, and Mr. Beckerine was ready to bail. Then a light midweek weather system dropped fresh powder, what he called a reset. The friends arrived on Thursday, February 12th, and trekked in. The huts are not what the word suggests. They are modern cabins with a renovated stone house serving as a communal kitchen. Guests sleep in the cabins and gather in the stone house for meals. The property is staffed by hut keepers who remained on the grounds through the storm, Mr. Beckerine said. On the first day of their trip, Mr. Beckerine and Mr. Gensheimer moved cautiously, poking at the snow and skiing mellower terrain to test the stability. As they built confidence, the 2 men pushed to more aggressive slopes. They skied the Castle Peak areas, which normally draws snowmobile traffic, but sat empty because of the drought, which had kept the machines off the lower elevations. Days started slowly. Mr. Beckerine, who spent years in the restaurant industry before turning to landscape work, cooked big breakfasts in the Stonehouse kitchen of potato hash, bacon, and eggs. But the approaching weather was part of the conversation among the roughly 16 people in different groups staying in the huts that week. Mr. Gensheimer remembers the calculus as unanimous: get out Monday or hunker down until Thursday. Wherever you are on Tuesday, he said, is where you want to stay. The wind rose Saturday night. By Sunday, the sky cleared one last time. On the way out, the party skied snow-softened snow and was back in Truckee, California by the afternoon. Mr. Gensheimer standing around in short sleeves. In less than 24 hours, he remembered thinking, it would be nuking snow. What killed at least 8 people on Tuesday, Mr. Gensheimer said, was not a simple story of too much weight on an icy surface. David Reichel, executive director of the Sierra Avalanche Center, explained that the conditions became lethal as the massive storm delivered heavy snow on top of a base that had been transformed by an exceptionally dry January and start to February. The fresh snow, he said, fell on a layer of snow that weakened and became unstable during the warm, dry weather. Mr. Gensheimer saw the same things from the vantage point of the slopes. The light dusting of snow that had provided such good skiing for his party had, during the sunny days that followed, begun to change. Without new snow to pack it down, the sun and air turned the surface into something resembling loose, dry sand. When the storm finally dumped a heavy slab of new snow on top, Mr. Gensheimer said, that sandy layer acted like a tray of ball bearings. It created a hidden trap, a slick, unstable floor where the entire mountainside would simply let go. Blackbird Mountain Guides itself had identified the problem. On Monday, the day before the avalanche, the company posted a video on Instagram showing what it described as atypical layering and warning of a particularly weak layer in many northerly aspects. The avalanche the next morning occurred on a north-facing slope. Before dawn on Tuesday, Mr. Reichel's forecasters had raised the avalanche danger warning to high. They determined, Mr. Reichel said, to the best of their abilities, that conditions were lethal. Then the forecasters lost the mountain. Visibility dropped to near zero. I couldn't see anything all day, Mr. Reichel said. Working only from remote sensors and weather models, his team watched from afar as the storm took hold. The huts the Blackbird party left on Tuesday were not in danger, according to Mr. Geinsheimer and Mr. Beckering. Mr. Geinsheimer said that the property did not sit in an avalanche path and could withstand major snow loads. If the party had simply stayed until Thursday, the members would have walked out alive. What Backcountry World is grappling with now is why they didn't. A longer, flatter route east, rated simple on the Land Trust's own website, might have taken the group out with less avalanche exposure. The route the Blackbird party appears to have taken is rated complex, with what many in the Land Trust described as many avalanche starting zones and terrain traps. Neither man was there on Tuesday. They do not know what the Blackbird guides knew or what led to the decision to leave. What Mr. Gensheimer does know is that at least 8 people are dead, among them 6 women identified by their families as mothers, wives, and close friends connected through a love of the outdoors. 3 of the dead were Blackbird guides. He has friends who work at the company. Mr. Beckering brings a different frame. For someone who spent 3 decades in these mountains, big weather in the Sierra is not something to sit out. It's something to navigate. A high danger rating does not mean a skier stops, he said. It means he chooses safe terrain. In a text message after an interview, Mr. Beckering offered a sobering assessment. If his own party had needed to get out on Tuesday, he would have taken the route the Blackbird guides took, he said. Even with all his years in the backcountry, Mr. Beckering said he would have thought it was a go. This was, in his word, a rare bird avalanche. Not skiers charging into a known path, but people traversing a route that does not usually prove fatal. Right now is not a time to be critical, Mr. Beckering said. It's a time to support. On Thursday, the weather broke. The sky cleared over Donner Summit. Fresh snow had reloaded the slope overnight, and the bodies remained unreachable. But the sun was out. Mr. Gensheimer said that the Blackbird party could have walked out that day and been home by the afternoon. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Reading Service. Stephen Ehrlich has written about the 3 knotty conflicts Witkoff and Kushner have tried to solve. President Trump's special envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, have been racing between Europe and Washington, trying to resolve 3 of the world's most intractable conflicts. In the last week alone, Mr. Witkoff, a businessman and close friend of Mr. Trump, and Mr. Kushner, Mr. Trump's son-in-law, were in Geneva to conduct talks on the Iranian nuclear program, even as an American armada builds up near Tehran. They then turned to 2 days of talks on Russia's war against Ukraine. Then they flew to Washington for the first meeting on Thursday of Mr. Trump's Board of Peace, set up to try to resolve the war in Gaza and the larger issue of an Israeli-Palestinian settlement. Marco Rubio, who is both Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, the first person since Henry Kissinger to do both jobs, seems reduced to a bystander. The energy of the envoys, neither of whom is a diplomat, is remarkable, given the long histories and complications of all three conflicts, but real progress has been scant. Here is a sense of where the three negotiations stand. Iran, talks amid signals of war. Another round of talks between Iran and the American envoys, mediated by the Omanis, took place on Tuesday. At the end, Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, sounded positive but vague, saying there had been agreement on a set of guiding principles and an exchange of draft texts at some point after consultation with both capitals. One U.S. official, speaking on the condition of anonymity to discuss private negotiations, said the two sides had made progress. The official said the Iranians would provide more detailed proposals in the next 2 weeks to address some of the unspecified gaps. But on what exactly remains unclear, especially with the United States building up its forces at a scale that seems to go beyond mere message sending. The Americans seem to be preparing by the end of the month for a large-scale attack on Iran while working to forestall the larger regional conflict that Iran promises if it is attacked. But Mr. Trump has the option of striking as soon as this weekend. Iran, too, is preparing for war. The messaging from Washington has been inconsistent. Mr. Trump talks about a nuclear deal, which seems at least possible, and another day about regime change. That seems harder. Diplomats suggest that a nuclear deal could involve Iran agreeing to suspend any enrichment of uranium for up to 10 years, while handing over its current supply of highly enriched uranium close to bomb grade. A nuclear deal could also involve Iran limiting any future enrichment to 3.67%, which can only be used for civilian purposes, with strong oversight and inspections from the International Atomic Energy Agency. While Iran denies ever wanting to build a nuclear bomb, it insists on the right to enrich under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But administration officials say a deal must go beyond Iran's nuclear program to limit its ballistic missile program and its support for its armed proxies in the region. And so far, Iran has rejected any limits on its missile program in the name of self-defense or on its help for allies. It considers those demands to be asking for capitulation from a government already badly weakened by major protests at home, which were putting down the extreme violence. Complicating the talks further is the deep mistrust of the United States and Mr. Trump by Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran. Not only did Mr. Trump rip up the 2015 nuclear deal in his first term, but he joined Israel in bombing Iran in June, even as U.S.-Iran negotiations were continuing. Tehran feels the same duplicity now and says it will strike back hard if attacked. That would most likely include large-scale missile strikes by drones against American ships and bases in the region and against Israel, and an attempt to close the Strait of Hormuz to all shipping. Iran has submarines with torpedoes and high-speed patrol boats armed with anti-ship cruise missiles. It could also attack U.S. allies and their energy infrastructure, like Saudi Arabia and Gulf countries, that would altogether drive up oil prices. Those countries have been urging Mr. Trump to negotiate and avoid regional war with uncertain consequences. Talks are proceeding, but the signals of war are growing louder. Ukraine, little agreement. Later Tuesday and again on Wednesday, Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner held talks with delegations from Ukraine and Russia, trying to seek an end to the war that began 4 years ago with Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Mr. Trump wants to end the killing and have a diplomatic victory before the American midterm elections in November, but a final peace deal still seems far away. The two main obstacles remain the issue of territory and of future security assurances for Ukraine after a settlement. Washington has been pushing Ukraine to hand over the rest of the Donbas region to Russia, even a large part that has not been occupied by Moscow. President Volodymyr Zelensky, supported by European leaders, has so far refused. Behind the scenes, Ukrainian, Russian, and American negotiators have floated the idea of a demilitarized zone in that area of the Donbas. People close to the talks say, but there is little sign of a compromise that both Mr. Zelensky and President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia would accept. Ukraine has pressed for an international peacekeeping force to be deployed to the region, which Russia is likely to reject. The Kremlin has suggested it could accept a demilitarized zone if it were patrolled by Russian police officers or Russia's National Guard, probably a non-starter for Ukraine. Any such deal would also require a sophisticated monitoring program against incursions by Russian forces in mufti or in police uniforms, a security assurances from European nations, and backstopped by the United States. The details remain vague, and so far Russia, at least in public, has rejected the idea of any foreign troops in any part of Ukraine. After the second round of talks on Wednesday, which broke off after only 2 hours, Mr. Zelensky said some progress had been made on the monitoring of a future ceasefire, including potential U.S. involvement. But the negotiations were not easy, he said, and there was no breakthrough on the most contentious issues, including the Donbas and control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe. Russia has been losing up to 30,000 soldiers a month, according to Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, and its economy is faltering with high inflation. Russian territorial gains are slow and bloody, while Russia continues to hit Ukraine's energy infrastructure with missiles and drones. But there is no indication that either Russia or Ukraine is ready to end the war. What remains unclear, as ever, is Mr. Trump's mood. He's swung from blaming Mr. Zelensky for the war to frustration with Mr. Putin and then back again. Mr. Zelensky complains that it is unfair for Mr. Trump to demand concessions from the victim and not the aggressor. European countries have vowed to continue support for Ukraine. Washington provided Kyiv no money at all last year, but do not have their own strategy to end the war. Unless, that is, Mr. Trump puts considerably more diplomatic and economic pressure on Mr. Putin, which has so far not been coming. There's always the possibility that Mr. Trump will just walk away from the problem. Sometimes you're better off letting them fight, he said in June. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the February 22nd issue of the front section of the New York Times. We read from the front section of the New York Times every Sunday at 1 p.m. Your reader has been Val. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the New York Times opinion page. Following that, at 3 o'clock, the New York Times Arts and Leisure, and at 4 o'clock, a rebroadcast of this morning's Buffalo News. Radio Reading mails out a large print program schedule to our listeners every other month. If you have not received a Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service large print program schedule in the mail, please call us at 716-821-5555. We will make sure that you receive one every other month. A Braille version of the schedule is also available upon request. Our number again is 716-821-5555. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print